Hello everyone. We're going to continue with our front end now. Currently, we have our back end working in Postman, able to get tokens. Now that we're able to get into front end here a little bit, but I have like an about page and a home page, and I want to make this home page secure. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. So what I've done is in our client folder, which is our front end, in our source, I have added an auth folder within our context folder. And in that auth folder, I've added three blank files ready to start. This is sort of the pattern I use to make these kind of hooks and reducers. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the auth context here. I'm just going to copy and paste this in. It's very simple. And it's just a general create context container that we're using to apply to the whole app. Okay, next we're going to work on our auth state here. Start initializing everything. So I'm first going to import into our auth state some of the things we need. Make sure Axios is installed. Okay, next we'll import our types that we'll use in our reducer. And since we added those types here, we need to include them in the list. And they are here. So register success, register fail, and so on. Okay, next I'm going to add an initial state, an initial auth state. And I created an object here that initializes it. It's just like, it's where the data comes in. And then here we're destructuring to use our state and dispatch with the reducer. Okay, for now I'm going to add a return here. Okay, so now we have our types here within our auth state. We also have to make sure that we export the component there. There's still plenty we need to make in this state, but I'm going to make a little to-do list that will remind us what we need to do in this file. So we're going to need to load a user, register user, log in a user, log out, and then clear errors. Okay, so we're going to, in order to use this auth state, we're going to need to go to our app here and bring it in. We'll change it to auth. And then next we're going to need to wrap this whole contact state in an auth state. So let's go ahead and wrap it. Okay, so now anything in the auth state we should be able to access. We're going to go ahead and get started making our login and register forms. We're going to put the auth state on hold for now. And what I've done in a component folder in our client source folder, in the component folder, I've added an auth folder that's holding our login.js and our register.js, which are both blank right now, but this is where we're going to construct our forms. So we're going to go ahead and start with the register form, and we'll start off with a functional component called register. So I'm going to set this to use state because that's what we're going to use. And then here, I'm going to use and set the state here. So we'll set that up here. So we have our use and set user in a state with all of the names that we need. This is a name, email, password, and then confirmation of password with password too. Okay, next we'll destructure these so we could use them as variables. So I'm going to go ahead and put a form in here because we're going to need it, and then I'm using a prop of onSubmit. Okay, and within this form, just to save time, I'm going to insert a completed div here. As what we basically done is I've given it a label, and in the input I've given it the ID of name, text, a name of name, and then I've brought in the value and then an on change for the state. Now we're going to need this for every field in the form. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy in the rest of these completed. And I went ahead and added some classes and stuff just for some styling in this outer container here. Plus, text primary, form group, etc. All right, so since we are using onChange in all of our form fields here, we need to make that. So we'll put it underneath our destructuring here. So it's an onChange event. And in here, we're using our state and our user. We're targeting our value for each of the onChange elements that apply. Okay, so since we're bringing in our onSubmit here, we need to make that as well. So for now, we'll go ahead and make an onSubmit. Okay, so now that we have our register there, let's go to our app.js here. And we'll go ahead and bring it here up top. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a register route here. Copy that. Save. Okay, let's go ahead and see if the register form is working. So I'll go up here, add it seems to be taking the onChange, so excellent. Okay, so now I'm going to make the login. I'm going to basically copy the register form and paste it in, and then just switch around a few things. So change this to login. So that's login. Let's make sure that it's logged, exported. Here we just need an email and a password. On submit, we'll just say login. Okay, and on the form submit, and then here we'll say login. So in the login form, we won't need the name field. We need the email. We need the password. We don't need the confirmed password in this form. And then let's change this value here to login for the button. So let's add this to our route. So I'm going to go back to app.js here. Copy this. Change this to login. I just changed this one to login. And login. And we need to import the login. So we'll do that. Copy that. And change that out. There we go. Okay, so now let's try to go to the login route. So localhost and we'll go login. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now we're going to need to put our user into the database. Once into the database, get a token, and then handle the token. So we're going to need to get into our auth state here within the client folder under context. Yes, under auth. So we're going to continue with this file. We have our little to-do list here. We're going to work on the register here. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste what I have. Okay, so what we've got here is an async. We're bringing in some form data in our headers. We're determining the content type, which is JSON. And then in our try catch, we're using an async and wait with Axios, and we're getting the user API, going in and hashing, getting the token. If it succeeds, using the dispatch, we'll do a register success, and we'll get the data, which is the token, through the payload. Otherwise, we won't. We'll just get a message, basically, from the alerts. So just to give you a little refresher here, when we go through the try catch, we're going to call the user API, which I believe. And when we do call that user API, we're going to have all of this function here. So it's just going to go through, use this, and then with the alerts, let us know if it succeeded or failed. So we're going to go ahead and close that. Okay, so now that we have that all situated here, we need to handle this in our Auth Reducer. Okay, so first in our reducer, we're going to go ahead and bring in the alerts that we need. So I'll paste that. Okay, still in the reducer, right under importing the types, let's set our default of the existing state. So this, we're using the state and the action with a case switch, setting the default to the current state, basically. And then within the switch, a success of register success. Then we'll go ahead and bring back another return. And in here, we're going to try to bring back the token once we get it. And when we get that token, we're going to set it in local storage. So we'll put it in local storage in this code here. So we'll set the item with the token, and we're using the action payload to get it. And then in this return, we're going to return the state down to the component. So use spread operator here to help us out. Get the action payload is authenticated to set to true. Okay, now we need to set up if it fails. So we'll do a case here of fail. And then if it does fail, what we're going to need to do is remove the token. So let's go ahead and do that. And then once that's cleared out, we're going to basically reset the state. So this resets the state if it fails. Okay, so let's go to our register form and use it. It is in our components under auth register. So let's bring it up in the top here, which is already here. We have the auth content being brought in. That's great. And then we also have our auth context use context already brought in as well. Excellent. And then below here, we're bringing in the register that we need, amongst other things that we're going to use later. But we're bringing in, with destructuring, the register that we need from the auth context. Okay, so we're going to head down to the onSubmit here. And what we've brought in is our register object, and these are the items that we need in there. So we need it from the form. The name, the email, and the password. Okay, so this is onSubmit is complete. Okay, in order to use that, we're going to need to go to the auth state and bring it into the provider. We already have them here. I just have them commented out. So now I'm going to use that one. So while we're here, make some skeletons that we could fill in a little bit. So we'll call this one load user. Okay, so now that we have that, we'll just go ahead and copy this into the other to-do list areas that we need to work on. So we got the register done. We need the login user. Paste this in here. We'll make this one log out. And then clear errors. Okay, we'll save that. Okay, so I think I'm going to try to register a user now. I believe everything should be okay. I'm going to pull up my MongoDB here. And right now I have 2 users that I'm testing with. I'll add a third just to see if it comes in there. So let's see what happens with jj@gmail.com. And okay, so it looks like it was successful here. Let's check out our database. We'll give it a refresh. Okay, so success. We were able to add Joe Jones to the database. Okay, so that's great. I'm going to close this out here. All right, so we're not quite there yet. We still need to manage some alerts, and our authentication isn't really working completely. We're getting the token, but we're not holding it. So we're going to go back to the register component, and up here we've brought in some things we need. Use effect. Here we're using the use effect. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my auth state, and I'm going to clear the errors here in my clear error area. So I'm going to paste that here. So clear errors, I'm using the dispatch and with the type of alert. And then because I added the clear errors here in the reducer, I'm going to need to add it here. And we'll bring this over here just to make it look nice. There we go. And this clears it out. So, okay, so now that we've done that, we can go back into registers and we can see here our alerts here. So we're bringing them in here and here, or from the auth context, actually. Okay, so now that we're able to get a token, we have to remember that JWT token is stateless. We need to create the state to maintain some sort of session and apply the authentication. We're going to work on that next with the load user. So I'm going to close some of these up here. We need the auth state, and we're going to start working on this load user here. So I'm going to copy and paste. Okay, so we have our load user here. Let's move it over. Okay, so we have our load user function here. It's async await. We're setting our auth token in a local storage here. We're going to the auth API to get the token. When the user is loaded, we get it back in the payload, and then we have some error handling here as well. So now we need to go to our Auth Reducer to handle that. So I want to make sure it's added up here. Okay, user loaded. It is one of our alerts. I'm going to go ahead and put this at the top. And I'm just going to paste that in. And basically what we got is a case of user loaded, and we're bringing in the state, making our authentication true, loading false, and then we're bringing in the payload. Okay, now that we have that in there, if there is an error of loading a user, we need to handle that. So we want to make sure that the token is closed. So we'll go ahead and add this capability. Okay, next we need to create a default header, sort of act like a global header that will hold the token for us to be able to use across the application. Let's see here. So in the components folder in the public client, there's a utils folder that we need to make, and within the utils folder we have a file called set auth token. Okay, and we need to put this code here. Basically, we're using Axios to call in the token, and we give it the key of X auth token, which is what we use in the header, which will create the token. Else, if it isn't, it will make sure that it's deleted. Okay, so now that we have our set auth token, we need to use it in our auth state because we have it loading right here in the load user. And what it's doing is that it's taking the local storage token and bringing it in. So I'm gotta make sure that it's being brought in here. So we'll import it here. Let's see if I can get this to work. Okay, so we're in our auth state here. In order to use this path in Axios, we need to use the route which is private. So it's private here in the back end in our routes auth. See right here. So we need to get a token and store a global header with it. So let's go ahead and do that. So in order to call this, we're going to need to do it in here. But we're going to do it in a component. So what I've done is in this created a utils folder, and inside created a set auth token, which we'll use here. Let's get in here and see what this is about. Okay, so the set auth token is using Axios. We are checking to see if the token is passed in, and if so, we set it to the global header, which is right here. And we use this as a key within our headers to access it. And if it isn't passed through, then we're going to remove the token. Okay, now that the set auth token is done, we need to use it in the auth state. So let's just import it here. And then in our load user, I uncommented it already. So now we have access to the token. And this is where we load it. Now go down to our register success dispatch here. And then we bring in the load user here. Okay, so once we register a user is able to log in. We're able to get a token, load the user, and then the is authentication is set to true. So let's go to our register page and under components and auth, open that up. Okay, let's go ahead and bring it in here in our auth context. Is authenticated. Also, then once we have it here, we could use it in our use effect. So let's do an if statement here. If it is authenticated, then we'll redirect to the root route, which is the slash. So this is how we redirect after authentication. So since we're depending on is authenticated and props history here, let's add them here to take care of any messaging that pops up. Okay, so once we register the user, I'm going to close this. Yes. It should call right here, and then go to the back end and get the user. Okay, so now that we can register and authenticate, we're going to work on our login form. Okay, so to get started on our login form code in auth state, we need to add it here in this login user area. So it's very similar to the register function here, so we could actually copy and paste this whole thing and then alter it. I'm going to paste the solution in here, and it will be the completed solution with all the alterations in it. Okay, so there we go. We have our login function here, which gives us in our header a content type of application JSON. And then in a try catch, we're using Axios to get the API of auth. And we have a dispatch of a login of success, which will bring back the payload data. And then if not, we have some error handling that'll give us a little bit of messaging if anything happens. Okay, so in order to handle this login types, we need to go to our reducer and add it into, let's say right here, because register success and login success both bring back a token, so they do the same thing. So let's paste that in there. And if we have a login fail, it's just like a register fail, so we need to remove the token. So we'll go ahead and add that there. Okay, so let's open up our login here. It's very similar to the register, so you could pretty much copy and paste it over and then change it. What we need to know is that I've imported both the auth context and the alert context into the page, and I also added the use context and use effect hooks. After doing that, I've added all of our states here. We have an alert context using use context and an auth context. And then we set the alert, and then with destructuring, we're bringing in all of our is authenticated and some of our clear errors, with our login being the main one. And it's pretty much the same with the use effect. You could copy this whole use effect, and I'm going to close this, and bring it in here, which is already here. And then as we go to the on submit, we're going to add some conditions to make sure that the email and the password are being filled in. It gives us an alert if they aren't, to ensure validation is good. Okay, so let's go ahead and try the login to see if it works. So let's go to our local host. And this is our login. I'm going to try to do it with nothing to test out our required validation. So our validation is working here. So in our login, I have a guy named Bob, and I'm going to use a login that I know exists. So this should work. So Bob, have Bob mail, and then B-O-B, and we should be redirected. Okay, there we go. So it seems to be working well. I'm going to open up some tools here that I recommend when working with React. And here in our authentication context provider, as you can see, everything's being brought in here. We have our token being brought in. We have a user with all of the data that we logged in from the database, and it's all being set in a state. So this is looking pretty good. Okay, so now we can register, log in, load our user, and now we just need to be able to log out. So we'll handle that in our navbar component. In our auth state, since we're working in our logout, it's very simple. We just change this part here to have a type of logout in the dispatch. And then in our reducer, Logout is exactly the same as all the other remove token alerts. So we add it in that list here, and it'll remove the token. And let's go ahead and open up the navbar component. It's in the auth layout navbar. There we go. Now this navbar is already complete, but I wanted to go through it so you can see what we did. Of course, we added in everything we needed up here. We added our contact context and our auth context. That's our link property from React Router DOM. And then, like the register form and the login, we brought in all of our states here. And then we also bring in our logout here. And this clears the contacts and logs out. And in our display, we have 3 fragments. And the fragments are holding each of the navigation that will be displayed depending on authentication. If nobody's logged in, you get the register and login links. And if you are logged in, you get the logged out, and then your name of the user is brought in to greet them so that you know you're logged in. And then, of course, you have to export it down here, and then these are the prop types that are being used. So now we have a way to log in and out. Now I'm going to go ahead and test it. Okay, let's log in first. So it seems to be working. We have our login here, and it gives the name of the user, and it gives us a logout button. So let's see what happens when we press the logout button. So now we need to make a private route. Okay, so now we're going to create our private route. I'm going to close out a few things here. Okay, so in our components folder, I have created a routing folder with a file called private route. So we're going to make a private route component so that we can apply it to our app.js just by adding private route right here to protect it. So let's go ahead and open up this private route folder, and we'll go ahead and start coding it in. So the first thing we need to do is bring in all of the imports that we're going to need. So use context, route, and redirect from React Router DOM, and then the auth context. And next, okay, so let's go ahead and make our private route function here. Let me export it real quick. So in our component, we're destructuring and setting the component, and with the REST operator getting anything else with it. Okay, now let's use our auth context here above the return. Okay, so in the actual return, I'm just going to paste in the route and redirect that we need. And basically what this is doing, it's rendering by using the res and the props to see if it's authenticated, and if it isn't, redirect them to the login page. Otherwise, use the props to let them in. And with the auth context, we're able to check if they are authenticated or not. Okay, so now that we have the private route component made, let's put it into the app.js. We'll import it here, and then we should be able to add it like a component. So private, let's save that. And then let's test it. Okay, so we are logged out. I'm going to go ahead and just try to go into our root and see if it lets me in. No, see, it redirects us. It won't let me in. It takes me to the login page automatically. So just to test it some more, I'm going to log in with a user I know that exists. And I'm able to log in, and it recognizes me. And then when I log out, well, I hope this was helpful. That is basically how you authenticate, create private routes, and we used hooks instead of Redux, use context, use effects,